these are more fun when you guys ask questions and I can give you the information that you're seeking or searching for, or at least as much of it as I can provide. End of the transfer window, I tried to freshen up to not look tired, but it was actually weirdly the most exhausting transfer window I've had, just chasing players. A lot of really in-depth conversations. Some got near the finish line, just didn't get over, and a lot of that, I mean, with salary cap leagues and rules, that's how things work. And couldn't get any of the big players we wanted over the line, but the truth is we were only looking to add players that we knew were going to come in and not challenge for minutes but play minutes. So weren't interested in bringing in depth. We've got a lot of really good players on this team, and that's also part of the challenge in this window was adding a player that was going to come in and like I said, not challenge but 100% contribute. Unfortunately couldn't do that, but now we shift our focus. There's still some free agents to focus on. That is one of the confusing things about a transfer window, just to touch on real quick. The only thing that's closed is transfers. It's not free agents or out of contract players, but also it allows us to perhaps shift some of our thought process into using some of the resources to secure future and renegotiate some contracts and get some guys locked in. I think it's easier for you guys to steer this.
Cool. We'll open up to questions. Jeremiah, Gigi has the mic. Start going around the room, but lead us off.
Yeah, you mentioned that you guys did pursue several players.
Yeah.
How frustrating is it though to be here and not have a signing? It's now the third straight summer where you guys haven't been able to make a signing. That's, as far as I know, unprecedented in modern MLS history. I guess you could just speak to that.
There's a lot of facets to what you said. It's not my third straight year, but it is the club's. We'd have to bring in Garth to answer some of the questions from 3 years ago. Last year, a lot of the roster, obviously, and the salary cap was cooked going into the year, so that equated to a summer without a massive signing. This summer, we knowingly and very consciously committed to our roster in January, and we brought in Wazowski and Nathan and Pedro and Bradilio, who scored a bunch of goals for Defiance last year. Some of those have been hampered by injury, but it was very conscious to commit early in the year to our roster and to the confidence that we had in the abilities we have. So that hasn't really wavered, and so that's why I say we weren't interested in adding a player just to add a player that's going to come in and practice. We've got guys that are practicing right now that are frustrated that they're not playing, but we're in a really good team. We're one of two MLS teams that are currently in a playoff spot, in the Open Cup semifinal, in the Leagues Cup round of 8. Hopefully after this weekend we're one of one. So when you look at the quality of what we've been able to accomplish, take away maybe the first 10 games of the year where we were quite frustrated and underachieving, but once we started to gain some health, we start to see the quality of the group. I always want to add players. I mean, that is the most fun thing to do, is add players that make you better, that add to your environment, that add to your culture, that challenge culture and force us to keep evolving, which is the most fun part of this. But the healthy pressure of my position is the fans, and the fans want to win. That's ultimately what this is about. It's not necessarily always about me having a shiny object or presenting a new player. Sometimes it's about sticking to what we have and knowing that it's where we need to be in the moment. So tough time to not be adding, because we did have some ability, but again, I wouldn't sit here and even pretend to be disappointed with where we are as a team.
Jada, go ahead.
Thanks. When you say chasing, can you clarify that a little bit? Are you saying that the players that you were going after didn't want to come here?
Well, it's a myriad of reasons, yeah. I mean, 99 out of 100 negotiations end with no, either from us or from a player or from an agent or from another club, because when you're talking transfers, there's so many elements that go into it. But in the moment, with the budget we have available, we weren't able to financially meet some of the players' desires, and then also with the way our accounting works in MLS, where transfer fees count against that cap hit, and into the cap hit subtracts from players' potential earnings, that sometimes it ends with no. And in the past, I've learned some of the best deals you do are the ones you don't. It wasn't always the case. It's never always the case. But in the case of this summer, we were very specifically chasing players that were a bit beyond. We knew they were a bit beyond what we had financially, but we were trying to bring them into what would have been a remarkable situation for us to get these high-profile players that can contribute at a level beyond the money we had, not to the money we had. So in the end, it just didn't work out with a couple of players, but we're still in touch with several of them. And I wouldn't be surprised if one of them ends up here in the winter.
And Albert made an interesting comment about winning CCL, and it would say something, I guess, negative in a sense if the roster did turn over majorly. How do you kind of feel about that? Because that is something you've kept the roster pretty much the same since that win. Does it say anything?
Sorry, I'm not following. From which win?
From the CCL, from 20.
From that, yeah. So yeah, I got you. That roster, and I had come in 2021, in this not quite summer of 21, but just before, and we built that team to win that tournament. And a lot of the commitments we made financially, fiscally, contractually were made to win that tournament. And we still have some of those contracts and some of those very good players on our team. The truth is, you don't need to change. You don't need to change a good thing, always. We took second in the Western Conference last year. Like I said, we're currently in a very successful position as we sit here today. Obviously, 10 games into the season, that wasn't the conversation, but corrected the ship, and credit to the players and coaches for making changes, both mentally, physically, in the way they approach games. Sometimes the contracts, length of contracts, commitments we make, we're good for those commitments. We don't run away from those commitments. So some of the contracts we have are tied into that specific year. We signed some very important players that helped us win that championship, and we've got some contracts expiring at the end of this year that we've got to now look in the eye and deal with. And this off season, there's multiple players going out of contract that we need to address over the next 4 or 5 months.
We'll go to Jackson next, and then down the line to Nico and Owen.
Craig, I'd love to talk about selling players. The first conversations that you may have had in terms about clubs inquiring about guys, and then as a kind of a follow-up to that, MLS new rule about how you can get up to $3 million from selling a player. How does that change the dynamic of how you the level of desire to sell a player, and then how the negotiations kind of go with that new wrinkle?
Yeah, that new wrinkle is brand new. So I think we have to wait to see how that impacts and affects truly how it plays out over the next 12, 18, 24 months, when we see that money start to come back into, if we want to call it the MLS ecosystem. In terms of selling players, we were contacted by a couple clubs this summer on a couple players, but nothing official. No official offers came through. I'm not sure on the players we were contacted on if we would have entertained them at the moment anyway. But we have entertained offers in the winter window. We were in touch with a couple clubs. We're trying to transfer players in. There's a lot of feelers that clubs put out. So it's very difficult to know just how serious a club is when they contact us. Same thing we're doing when we're asking about players on other teams. But selling players it's a real topic. It is a real function of our cap on how to build cap, because like you mentioned, you can now add up to $3 million of allocation on a sale, on a player sale. And I think that has to become part of the economic structure and planning moving forward in terms of every team in MLS, not limited to the Sounders, but it certainly needs to become part of our model and will become part of our model. Sometimes fate decides that for you as well, because some of these players are taking their opportunities at very young ages and doing well. And if recent transfers in our league of young players are any indication of where we're heading as an MLS and as a club, those will not avoid the Sounders in terms of piquing interest in a lot of our guys.
Nico, go ahead.
Craig, you have always been very straightforward, and you always hold yourself accountable. There are things that are beyond your control, like budget transfer and the salary cap that you were kind of given. But looking back at the players that were brought in the earlier window, I mean, none of those players really has been a major contributor. None of them has really been starters.
Yep.
Some because of injuries and other things. But how would you rate, your overall year? The things that you've tried to do and maybe things that have not come the way you maybe planned them.
Yeah, I mean, look, Danny, of the guys I mentioned, Danny and Nathan were brought in to be solid MLS players, reserve players. They were never projected, nor were they communicated with that they were going to be expected starters. As we know, nothing works out the way we plan. Some guys start, some guys don't. And with Pedro specifically, his injuries have prevented his contributions. And so it's an interesting. I know Pedro is a good player. I watched him. I studied him for months before we signed him. I know he'll contribute massively if and when he's on the field consistently. And so, and in the times he has been on the field, we've seen flashes. I don't ride the ups and downs, the waves as much as everyone else, because my job doesn't really allow me to. But I know that the expectations when we bring a player of Pedro's ability in is to contribute weekly, and that hasn't happened. So my level of, I'm disappointed. I'm disappointed not in Pedro. I'm disappointed in the scenario. He's been really snake bit with injuries this year. I don't think it's going to limit his long-term success with our team. I'm disappointed for the fans that haven't gotten to see him, that haven't gotten to watch him contribute on a weekly basis yet. But I'm confident. I don't flinch in the signing. He's going to contribute to the Sounders for many years to come at a really high level, and I just can't convince myself to think otherwise at this point.
Yeah, with that in mind, just a real quick, and I'm sorry. With what you just said,
Yeah.
how difficult and what was the balance like of not doing a panic hire or just signing somebody just for the sake of signing somebody, knowing that you kind of had some of that pressure of maybe the elements that you had brought in and some of the additional roster rules that were kind of brought in to help out, bring more U22 players or, give you more flexibility?
I mean, the roster is the salary cap it's quite confusing while it appears simple. The U22 rule and that space that's open on our roster could come in quite handy in the second half of this year if we look to extend some of our one or two of our young players, and we might use that on a really talented young player that's already here. So it doesn't go without thought. None of these roster rules obviously escape our short-term planning versus our long-term planning. The U22 rule is also changed. Back to Jackson's point about the allocation changed, so did the U22 rule. Now it's 3 DPs and 3 U22s, and there's no crossover. And so all of those things changed in the middle or after the planning had happened for a lot of what we're doing. But again, this is not me sitting in front of you guys and telling you that we're stoked to not sign a player, to not bring someone in. It's not me celebrating the fact that we didn't get one of these guys that was a little bit outside our financial grasp to come here for a little bit less. It's just acknowledging that we weren't going to compromise we weren't going to compromise for the sake of the locker room, for the sake of the staff, but also for the sake of the fans. Like, we're not going to compromise and bring someone in that they're not going to watch play soccer at this point.
Owen, go ahead before we circle back to follow-ups.
Yeah, I actually wanted to ask about the U22 rule because there's this roster construction that they announced today where you can have 3 and 3, or you can switch one and have a fourth U22. I want to know if you guys have looked at that at all. You guys obviously have 3 DPs that you're happy with, but if that's something in your future, if you've looked at it.
Man, every part of my brain, I want to say something like, no, we haven't thought that. No, look, these are new elements that impact the greater league, right? So how it impacts our team, there's a little bit of, we really have to personalize what's written on paper and what looks like every team is going to go do X, Y, or Z. We've never been a club that wants to chase to spend the most money and wear that crown. We won't operate that way because we don't feel we need to in order to have success. So how we apply these mechanisms and the rule sets and the way they're done will be very, very personalized to our club and to our spend. I said this recently, we have a lot of really young, talented players that we have developed. And until I believe that we're going to go out and bring in ultra talented 21, 22-year-olds that are far, far superior to the players that we're developing within our budget, I'm not sure that we'll do that. The moment we find one of those players within our budget guidelines and the resources that we have that is exponentially better than one of our young players, we will absolutely go after those players. But how that impacts us moving forward I wouldn't be surprised come January, we will most likely, if not assuredly, have 3 U22s and 3 DPs on our roster. It just depends on how we settle that and how that conversation comes back in. Are they 3 U22s that came through our system, or is it 1 from outside our system and 2 from in? That's the combination that we're trying to figure out.
How confident are you that you have the resources you need to compete with like we said, there's teams all over the league are finding ways to bring in players using various different resources. How confident are you that you had the resources you needed to make those moves this summer? And how confident are you that coming into the Club World Cup this winter, that you have the resources needed to further bolster the roster?
Club World Cup next summer. Sorry.
Right. Well, in this upcoming off season, how confident are you that you have the?
So I think the resources that we've had since I took over, obviously, to Jada's point earlier, there were a lot of contracts that we were committed to, and in this time frame that I've been in this chair, we've had 1 DP contract to go out and fill. Back to Nico's point, it's been a little bit unfortunate with the snake bites of injuries that Pedro's had, but I'm fully confident he's going to contribute at a high level, obviously. So as we age and some of these contracts expire at the end of this year, we have 2 designated players going out of contract. We've got a TAM player going out of contract. We've got quite a bit of resources that are resetting, that are just resetting over the last 2 or 3 years. So how we deploy those resources are key to our competition. And I can address Club World Cup. I'd like to do that separately because I think it's a little bit aside to the point of salary cap and managing the resources. I think we have the resources that we have. We have 3 designated players. We can't just go get another designated player. That's not how it works. We are up against, from a cap resource standpoint, we're on the cap. We have Arriaga's cap space, and that's what we have right now. So I don't know if more resources necessarily would have dictated different behavior. Now, if you're talking exponential, if we're going to go spend 10 or 12 million and we're going to buy someone out and we're going to go, those are different types of acquisitions than the current structure of our roster. those conversations all come back into play this winter when we have these contracts running out and expiring. So I think the resources for the winter window will be drastically different than what we've even had available on the cap, and that will impact signings as well as acquisitions and the number of acquisitions, frankly.
Well, I guess to follow up though on that, how confident are you that you have the resources needed to fill those? Like you'll have those DP spots. You'll
Yeah.
have like, are you confident that you can actually go out and
Oh, yeah.
buy players that you?
Yeah. We'll go out and we'll make the investments and we'll make the correct decisions on behalf of the organization. We have the resources to go do what we need to do. We just need to be a little bit patient and when we get to those, we get to them. Some of these are going to be big acquisitions. Some of them are going to be, I guess, mid-tier acquisitions, if you will, for the way our salary cap works, because that's essentially what a TAM acquisition is. But we'll have the resources and we'll be making significant signings in the next 12 months. The winter is an interesting window. You guys have covered this forever. Not every player is available. The summers are much I guess more open in terms of most of the world operates on a July to July calendar. So there's more player acquisition ability in the summer. So I wouldn't be surprised if we hold a little bit of resources in the winter this next season for a summer acquisition, an adjustment mid-year.
Jada, go ahead.
We'll actually have the ability to do that.
With your comments there, that makes it kind of sound like that you've moved on from Raul. Can you make any comment about where you are with him as far as his contract goes, and then I believe it's JP Albert too. But I'm most concerned about Raul.
Raul, Albert, João Paulo are three players that are going out of contract. I don't remember putting one name on it, but you're asking about Raul?
Yeah, well, if you're willing to talk about it, the reason why I say that is because you said we would go out and
Yeah.
So that's
No, I've been through this last year. These guys are players that are contributing, massive contributors to the club's success, ultimate professionals. I mean, these guys are doing their jobs very well. And we're gonna have to make some decisions over the next 4 or 5 months that can be tough decisions. They might be tough decisions to keep. They might be tough decisions to not keep players here. But those are conversations that it's my job to have those, and I can't flinch in having those honest conversations with the players and their representation. But those are between the player and the club for now, and we'll address those in time.
Are those conversations started though? Have you
Oh, yeah.
started?
Yeah.
And then the other question that I had was just how are you balancing, if at all, lacking, or some believing that a lack in or drop in attendance has to do with the fact that you haven't made much roster move or visible moves to improve the team by perception?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think it'd be unfair for me to answer it without more data. I hear a lot of rumors. I hear a lot of narratives. I think I'd like to see, attendance versus like attendance now versus attendance then versus the why, and how many people were asked, and was everyone interviewed? Was it just 100 people, and we're expanding on 100 people, extrapolating on that? Ultimately, I think the job that I'm tasked with is to make sure that our staff and our on-field, our players have the ability to go out and win games and entertain the fans. And that's the piece of this puzzle that I'm working on the most. I'm working on daily. I am very concerned when I, with my eyes, perceive that there could be less people in the stadium. But I still would love to know all of the reasons and the narratives and the facts. So I like objectivity when it comes to that stuff, because subjectivity is the master of illusion when it comes to those conversations.
Is it enough to look into has the Sounders organization looked into how those two correlate?
I believe the business side is doing a lot of questions right now. I think we're talking to a lot of people. I mean, obviously with season ticket renewals going, I think there's a lot of feedback coming in. I don't think it's all been, it just kind of is starting to calm down. So it hasn't really been filtered quite yet, and at least, hasn't been filtered all the way to my desk, because I'm not the one sitting in those meetings and getting that direct feedback. Always open to it. I get a lot of it on game days at the stadium when I'm walking around. So.
You said that it's still possible that one of the guys you're going after in the summer window may even end up here, in the later winter. So would you say that in a sense maybe you ran out of time with this window and getting something done?
No. I mean, the conversations came to an end. For a couple of players, we just didn't have the financial resources right now to make the deal work, because we also have to compensate the clubs. That's transfers cost money, right? And by the time you compensate the club and compensate the player, sometimes the resources run out. And I think that's more of what happened. Players were very attracted to the project, very attracted to the club. I mean, clearly, everything online. The fan base is a very attractive fan base to play in front of. It's one of the best, and so it's sometimes it's not the city or the stadium. It's a job, and at the end of the day, these guys play for money, and sometimes that's what it comes down to. And I think right now we just ran out of resource on the cap.
And then on the selling side, you mentioned in terms of the new rule, the wrinkle of $30 million, you kind of need to see how it plays out in the rest of the league. You mentioned 12, 18, 24 months. Just to confirm, that doesn't mean you're going to wait that long to make moves. You're willing to sell guys earlier.
Well, yeah, the timeline is to see how it impacts the league, not impacts our club. The timeline is, some clubs will have the opportunity to take advantage of this window. So if they add $3 million in allocation, that allocation money is now in the league. How is it getting dispersed? Where is it getting used? Is it used for trade? Is it used for compensation? We need to see this on a scale over the next 6, 12, 18 months to truly see how these monies impact the league and impact the movement within the league and impact movement from outside the league. We can use those resources in a lot of different ways to attract players from outside the league, but allocation can also be traded, right? So we need to kind of wait and see how all of this money is going to play out. And if you imagine 28 teams, 29 next year, all do this in the same year, you're adding, 87 million of allocation to a pot of player pool money that if everyone did it in the summer, for instance, wasn't there in January. So there's this knock-on effect if it happens year over year over year, where if we're developing good players and if we're in the world market as a league, all of this money, it doesn't disappear, and it is real money that's going back into players. And so we need to see how that all plays out. The valuations of players, I think it'll impact the trade market, significantly. I think it'll also impact, in league movement and thought process.
Does that $3 million stack per transaction, or does it like one $3 million chunk?
Oh, that's all in the rules. I wouldn't dare step on the toes of the MLS explanations, but I can tell you this: like, every team can get it, and if you just did it once, that's a lot of resources that go back into the league across the league.
All right, Nico, time for a couple more follow-ups here.
Yes, just wanted to touch back to a couple of things that you mentioned. One of them was a lot of the other part of the narrative of why maybe not bigger players are being brought in is because of the resources maybe spent on this facility, on the purchase of the rain. Have you been told how that could affect your operation budget at all?
It didn't affect the operation budget. I mean, like I've said, we have 3 designated players. We have our TAM money spent. We've maxed out and we're committed to these contracts, and we're committed to these legendary players of our club, and we're committed to these players that are still working their butt off for the Sounders. And that doesn't matter if you stack money on top of it. You don't have more roster spots to go do it. There was one potential roster spot that could have impacted, which was a U22 spot, which we actively chose not to use because of strategic roster build and reasons in the future planning.
And speaking of those legendary players, I mean, you talked about Raul. Beyond conversations that are already being had, if the price is right, I mean, the club wants to keep a guy like Raul Ruidiaz, right?
Raul, Joao, Albert, these guys that are going out of contract, they're Sounders. They belong here. Whether or not, because of our roster rules and salary cap rules, we can all come to that clear commitment to one another, that also actively suffices and satisfies both sides in terms of the benefits. That's the trick, right? Is making sure we try and get to that point that makes everyone happy and gives everyone the right role. It doesn't always happen. I mean, these jobs aren't easy. Their job is very difficult, and they've got to make big decisions. You know, sometimes those big decisions are more money. Sometimes those big decisions are less money. Sometimes they're in a different city. They've got to move families. You know, I don't live in a different world than that. I have the same thing with my family and my job, but these are real conversations that we're having, and we'll be active in coming to resolution. And you know, I think we saw over the years from the Sounders, and one thing we need to continue to do is make sure that the relationships are healthy regardless of the resolution.
Yeah, I mean, specifically talking about Raul, I mean, a legendary player like him, I mean,
Yeah.
just particularly him, would it be something that you would want to have under the right price tag?
Well, it's hard to answer that now. I mean, it is this summer. We need to see how the next couple months go. Everything in soccer is evaluation. Like I said, if after the first 10 games you asked some of the same questions you're asking today, you would have gotten different answers, right? So I don't want to speak on his behalf, our behalf as a club, but over the next couple months, we've got to find that resolution. And I think his performance matters, his contribution matters, and then whether he's happy with the club itself, you know, that matters too. Like, the player is a huge part of this, and I wouldn't take that power away from him.
Any final questions for Craig, guys?